Hi, everybody. Sorry it's taken a while. We had some technical difficulties, so thank you for joining. I'm happy to see some smiling faces. Can you hear me okay? Wave if you can. Hooray, thank you. Sorry about that. You can tell we're out of practice, right? I'm going to wait for a few minutes because we've literally just got this sorted out, so thank you. Sometimes what happens with these Zoom things, and I've had it happen to me on several occasions, is that I have a link that doesn't seem to bear any relation to anybody else's link. So thank you, Nathan, for sending me another link, because that's not the link I had. But that's okay. We'll get there in the end. So we actually had about 68 people sign up, and I'm afraid we may have lost some if they tried to join and went, wait a minute, where's this amazing talk that I signed up for?
It took me about 4 times to get it. It kept asking for a password instead of going to an automatic entry into the site.
We'll get this this is the first time we've done one for about 9 months, and our tech guru wasn't available, so we were kind of winging it a little bit, but thank you for letting us know.
Yeah, I had to reset my whole Zoom password.
Okay. All right, let's see. We'll give it one more minute and see if other people are struggling. I was hoping we could kind of get over Zoom by now, but it still seems like the best way to communicate with everybody.
Those with us with tenacity got here. Hi, Melissa.
Hi.
Can you send out another email to the group that responded with a different link? Would that get more people in?
It would have to be set up with the Zoom, whoever set up the Zoom to put that in, just a glitch.
Let me see if I can do that.
Yeah. But if you're recording it, that will be wonderful.
Yes, and we will be recording it. So as soon as I get started, I'm going to give it one more minute. And
forgive the book cover, but I wanted to remind you to mention your beautiful book on occasion. So
thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Ardis, thank you for being here. I'm sorry we've had some technical difficulties this evening. Okay, it's 5:05. I'm going to start because we are going to record it, and I think, it's already telling me it's recording. So, okay, great. Now, my next challenge is screen sharing. So let me just try and get that set up. Here we go. All right, go down here. All right, can you all see the screen? Yay. I'm going to ask everyone else to mute themselves at this point. So I know it's tempting to keep your voice on, but for the time being anyway, just mute. And then once I get to the end, I'll ask you to unmute so you can ask any questions that you have. So, okay, without further ado, this is a talk I've given a couple of times about researching your home's history, but this one is kind of more tailored to people who just have that kind of curiosity. As you know, many of you know, I'm also the author of Mod Mirage, and the house on the cover of Mod Mirage is one that I'm going to be talking about a bit this evening, and talking a bit more about how I found out its history. I write a lot of historic nominations for homeowners and communities in Palm Springs and Rancho Mirage. This was the very first one I did for the Sandcliff community in Palm Springs. I also did Villa Royale, which is a hotel that I'm going to be talking about a little bit as well. The Pearson Residence, which is a beautiful 1930s house in Palm Springs. This is a recent one I did, the Fine Residence, which is here in Rancho Mirage over on Marba Drive. That just got designated. This is the absolutely most recent one I did, which is the Jimmy Hines Residence at Thunderbird North. And that brings me to a list, which of course we're going to send out to everybody who signed up. You can make a screen grab of it if you want to right now, but it's also a reference tool for later. As I say, we'll send it out, and also you'll have it on the recording, which we'll send to you too. So this is a list of most of the historic resources that I access on any given day when I'm researching a project. And I'm going to talk you through about half a dozen of them. These are my 6 key ingredients. The first one are historic phone books. The second is press cuttings. The third is building permits. The fourth is family photographs. Fifth is archives. And the sixth is original grant deeds. And I will take you through all of these. So I often describe my job, or my hobby, as it sometimes is, as looking under rocks and then joining the dots. So what I have to do when I'm writing about or researching a home for a client or for a community is I have to look through every single historic resource that I can, all of those that are on the list. And then I have to kind of link everything together and see and get it to create a story that tells who the original owners were, who the architects were, what's happened to the house over time, and that kind of thing. For people who are just interested in finding out more about their home, you don't have to go into as much detail as I do, but this, what I'm going to tell you tonight is really a way to get started. So let me talk about phone books, because they are the first step, and these are historic phone books. I'm going to give you a short demonstration at the end of this talk, but this is a resource that I use a lot. It's through the Palm Springs Library. It's called accessingthepast.org. And what I usually do, because I can never be bothered to type the whole thing in, is I just Google accessing the past phone books, and then I get to where I need to be. The thing about this resource is that it starts at 1938, and at the moment it ends at 1964. So if you have a house that was built after 1964, there are hard copy phone directories at the Palm Springs Historical Society. But if you have a house before 1964, you can probably find out who the original owner was by, by using this resource. So this is a situation that I was going through. I was looking for a woman called Margaret Lester. And first of all, I knew that the address of this house was on Cypress Drive. I was asked to go and visit a house on Cypress Drive in Thunderbird Country Club by the owners because they didn't know who had built their house and they wanted to find out more about it. So in 1954, in the really early phone directories, there were several people listed here under Cypress Drive. I knew which was the Phil Harris house, I knew which was the Milt Hicks house, but I didn't know which was the Margaret Lester house, so that kind of gave me a clue. Okay, so then the next thing I did was I went to a later phone book. I went to the 1959 phone book, And there I found the actual street numbers. So what happened in the early days of Thunderbird Country Club, and in fact in the early days of most streets in Rancho Mirage, or what was then the area that became known as Rancho Mirage, is that streets often didn't have street numbers. Houses didn't have street numbers, not until later on. So if you're looking through a phone book and you don't find your house number, I recommend that you go a bit later, like to 1959 or early 60s, and then you'll find the number. Okay, sorry. Right. So this is what I found in the 1954 directory. Margaret Lester, Cypress Drive. Then I found, went to press cutting. So I knew that Margaret Lester owned this particular house. And so this is my second most important resource. This is where I find my press cuttings. I go to cdnc.ucr.edu. I actually, because I use it so often, when I type in CDNC, it pops up. And excuse me, this is the homepage. And pretty much any homepage that you research for anything that you're looking into, personal or otherwise, has a search box at the top. So here in the search box and over on the right-hand side, you have the magnifying glass. So I enter Margaret Lester, and I click on the search button. I didn't find, I'm going to cover this a bit later, but I didn't find anything when I looked for Margaret Lester. But what I did think about was, you know, back then everybody had a nickname, and Peggy was the really common nickname for Margaret. And so what I did was I entered Peggy Lester instead. And what you're also going to notice is that around the name that I enter in the search box, I put these quotation marks, because that defines your search. And I'm sure if any of you have done any research in the past, you know about defining your search. If you don't put those in, you can sometimes end up with everyone called Peggy and everyone called Lester. So by putting those quotation marks or inverted commas quotation marks around the name, that assures you that you've defined your task. So here I got Peggy Lester, and I've got all sorts of wonderful things here that tell me about Peggy Lester, Michael Lester. Here's something about buying a house, Peggy Lester, a golfing and desert enthusiast, building quite a something. So my interest is piqued. I need to find out more. So after I've clicked on some of these links, these are the results that I come up with. On the far left, April 1953, Margaret Lester is building a dwelling that's costing $20,000, which seems incredibly cheap, but it was 1953. Then I come across 9th of March 1953. There's Peggy Lester, a golfing and desert enthusiast, building quite a manse on Thunderbird Golf Course. She loves people, and people ditto her. So she was popular. So 19th of March, there's a reference to Peggy Lester's birthday party. Peggy Lester's birthday party was sumpin'. Never saw a gal get such gifts. The prize being Ruth Warburton's a quarter horse named Misty. This fine mare arrived in her own trailer, accompanied by 3 cowboys from Thunderbird stables. But then the most important part of this particular document is that down at the bottom, it says that she's leased the beautiful Mrs. Frank Morgan house on Sahara Road, while her new Quincy Jones designed home is being built. So for me, that was bingo, hooray. Myself and another local historian I'd taken some pictures and shared them with him. And I said to him, this looks like an LA architect, but I can't quite put my finger on it. So we had a suspicion it was Quincy Jones, but we weren't 100% sure, but this proved it for us. My computer is doing weird things. Hold on one second. Okay, here we go. This is just another example I wanted to share with you and how press cuttings can help you identify architects. When I was researching the 1930s house, I was sure I wasn't going to find a press cutting from the Desert Sun, because the Desert Sun didn't start to publish until late 1930s. And so I thought, well, I'll have a look anyway. You never know what might show up. And what I didn't realize is that in 1960, they were publishing articles about what happened in Palm Springs 30 years beforehand. And so Henry C. Pearson, who owned that house, the 1930s house I showed you a short while ago, this article says, and it's from 1930, that he is building a home on his estate in the Merita Vista tract, and his nephew, John Barnard of Boston, it says Miss, but it's Mass, obviously, is here to design the home. And here's one more example. This house, sadly, is no longer here in Rancho Mirage, but we're going to be talking about it in the newsletter in the future. This was a house that was built by Albert Frey for Raymond Hatton, and it was on what's now Frank Sinatra Drive, almost opposite the entrance to Tamarisk Country Club. This photograph is by Julius Schulman, and it shows Mr. and Mrs. Raymond Hatton here. But in this article from the Desert Sun, it says that Mr. and Mrs. Raymond Hatton are in the village to consult their architect, Albert Frey, in regard to their ranch project southeast of Palm Springs. This house is actually pretty well documented, so I would have found that anyway, but it just gives you another example of how we find these houses. So the Los Angeles Times, I quite often look at that because, as most of you know, from really the 20s through to the 60s, late 60s, people who had second homes in Palm Springs were primarily, they had second homes here, and most of the time they were from Los Angeles. So I quite often, if I'm looking up an older home, and I found out who the owner is, I check in the LA Times archive, and I access that via the Los Angeles Public Library, which is lapl.org. You do need to have a membership to the public library, and I kind of cheat because a friend of mine still lives there. Sorry, my cat is interrupting me. I have a friend who still lives in LA, and so I access via her membership. But here we've got the LA Times Historical Archives. Need to dump my cat on the ground. So what happens when you click on that link is it takes you to, guess what, a search box. And in this particular search box, I typed in Henry C. Pearson because I knew that he spent most of his time in Los Angeles and his Palm Springs home was his second home. And again, what happens when I type in Henry C. Pearson? This amazing article popped up. So this is an article from 1935, the Los Angeles Times, and it talks about the fact that Henry Pearson had just donated 700 books to the Los Angeles Public Library. It talks about how important he is as a person, as a human being. It talks about how he basically brought rubber to Los Angeles and turned Los Angeles into a car city. He was the editor of a magazine called India Rubber World, and he basically discovered an India rubber plant that changed the course of rubber production in the world. So then that was an amazing article. It gave me huge amounts of information about him, and the information about the original owner is what I need to help sell the story to either the Palm Springs Historic Site Preservation Board or to the Historic Preservation Commission in Rancho Mirage. Here's another trick, as I did with Margaret Lester and Peggy Lester. If you're looking for somebody's name, use their initials as well. So I changed my search to H.C. Pearson for the LA Times, and what I ended up with was his obituary, which was front page of the LA Times in 1936. Here's a picture of Henry, and 1.5 columns about his life, which explains how important he was. And the reason this was super important to me is because I was having a debate with the preservation officer at the City of Palm Springs Historic Site Preservation Board about whether Henry Pearson was still important in his world when he built the house. And the fact that the LA Times featured him on the front page when he died proved, I felt absolutely without question, that he was still considered to be an extremely important person when he died. I'm going to talk about building permits. It's fairly brief, but let me just explain a little bit here. This particular building permit is from the City of Palm Springs, and it relates to the Villa Royale Hotel. And some of you may be aware that the Villa Royale Hotel had long been considered to be the home of Sonia Henney. And Sonia Henney was a famous ice skater. And everyone thought that, well, everyone in my business anyway, thought that this was a myth. And the owner of the Villa Royale at the time was convinced that it was true. So this was a bit of myth busting that I had to do. He wasn't, I don't think he was very happy about it actually, but that's another story. Anyway, the original owner, as of the building permit, explained that the original owner was Evelyn Pell. So that was the Palm Springs one. This is a Rancho Mirage historic building permit, and a lot of you may have tried to get historic permits out of the city of Rancho Mirage and not had any luck. I have access to building permits in Rancho Mirage, or what is now Rancho Mirage, from 1954 or thereabouts up until about 1965. And what happened was myself, well, actually a couple of friends and colleagues who are researchers, found lurking in the Riverside County Planning Office in Palm Desert an old filing cabinet full of old building permits. And what we did was we spent about 3 weeks just before COVID locked us all down, scanning everything. And we now have them, I have them all on a jump drive. And I gave Rancho Mirage City Planning Office a jump drive, but I think it's probably lurking in somebody's drawer and probably will never see the light of day again. But if you do ever want to check on if you have a house built in those dates, for sure get in touch with me and I'll look it up. So this is one for the Hoagie Carmichael house. It's over at Thunderbird Country Club. It's still standing. It was actually a Cody house. One of the things about these permits is they don't give you a huge amount of information, but they can tell you some facts about dates and who built it. Usually doesn't have an architect's name on it. Family photographs are really fun. And if I'm kind of running into problems, what I do is I do research on ancestry.com or Desert Sun. I look up someone's obituary in Desert Sun or in the LA Times, and I find out the name of family members. And this has rewarded me many times. In many different ways. So I'm going to show you a little bit about that. So Villa Royale, again, this was a particular treasure trove. This is one of probably about 50 sheets of photographs that the daughter of the original owner had in a box in her garage. And every photograph was annotated by the grandmother of the woman I met. And it shows the whole construction process of everything that happened at Villa Royale. And in case you're wondering why it's called Villa Royale, the name of the two children with Valerie and Richard, sorry, I need to get rid of my cat again, Evelyn Pell decided that she was going to call it VR something, and so she came up with the name Villa Royale, which I think was kind of cool. But this was an amazing treasure trove. I mean, I'd never found so many photographs before or since, and I was able to actually compare every single thing at the original part of the hotel with all the images. So it was just an incredible resource. Back to Margaret Lester. That's Margaret Lester standing on the right with her son in front of her house. And I tracked down Michael Lester, her son. He was he probably still is, a retired judge living in Arizona. And I sent him a letter. And I find that in these situations, snail mail is absolutely fantastic, because people have a chance to read a letter and they have a chance to really digest it. It speaks to how serious you are, and it shows that you're not trying to get anything from them, nothing of value, nothing value to them anyway. And it just helps them take you seriously. So I always recommend snail mail versus email, but phone calls are okay too. Fortunately, Michael Lester was the only son, and he had a very close relationship with his mother, and he had kept a lot of records of when they lived at this house. And he told me some amazing stories as well about how he used to watch TV with Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, and how Ralph Kiner taught him to play baseball, and all sorts of amazing stories. But he had this priceless photograph of the back of the house that was designed by A. Quincy Jones. And that was just an incredible find. This particular picture belongs to granddaughters of the architect who designed that 1930s house that I never thought I would track down. The family members, I think, lived in somewhere like Alabama. And actually, I can't even remember how I even pinned down the fact that they were the grandchildren, but I did. Again, they had kept a lot of material that belonged to their father, who was also an architect, who fortunately had kept a lot of material that also belonged to his father. So here on the right in this shot here, we have John Edwin Barnard, who designed the Pearson residence with his son, and they're standing at a drawing board looking at some drawings. And on the right-hand side is a picture of John Edwin Barnard, who was also a well-known watercolorist. And so that was a picture taken of him around the time that he would have designed the house for his uncle, Henry Pearson. So again, beautiful pictures that were invaluable in telling the story about the house. When I was researching this one more recently, this house on Marber Drive, I went through the grant deeds because I'll come to that in a minute. And I discovered that one of the owners of the house was a well-known musician, Pat Rizzo, who had stayed in the desert for decades. In fact, he only died 2 or 3 years ago. He was a very well-known musician, woodwind, saxophone, flute, that kind of thing. And he had been a member of Sly and the Family Stone. He was a member of War. He played with Ry Cooder, the Allman Brothers. And I was able to contact, there were obituaries for him in the Desert Sun. Actually, Bruce Fessier, who lives close to me, also knew the Rizzos, and he suggested I contact the daughter, and she had some pictures of the house from when they lived there in the early 70s. They're not very clear, but they showed that the house was still pretty original from the external street elevation, and that was really key for me being able to push the historic nomination through to its final designation. A little case study here about a place called Tamarisk Village. I had this article from Palm Springs Life magazine from the early 60s sitting on my desk for the longest time, and it was about an area called Tamarisk Village. And I just could not get to the bottom of where Tamarisk Village was. And there was no photograph of the street elevation of the house, so I had nothing to compare it to. But this house sounded really intriguing. It didn't say who the designer was. It just talked about the person who had it built. And I thought, well, you know, I'll put that to one side and I'll come back to it one day. And then a friend of mine, Frank Lopez, who's also the archivist at the Architecture and Design Center in Palm Springs, he was archiving all the Hugh Captor drawings that he had got from Hugh's storage. And one day I was in there talking to Frank, and I said, do you think that Hugh Captor ever did any homes in Rancho Mirage? And Frank pulled out these drawings and it said Donald Allen Baker. And I went, wait a minute, I have the article that goes with that. So now I know exactly where that house is. So it was really an amazing moment. In fact, the Desert Sun ran an article about the find, the discovery about these Hugh Captor houses, because in fact there were 4 all in a group. And they're on Mottle Circle in Rancho Mirage, which is just off sort of between Palm View Road and Duval. And so, yeah, that was just an incredible find. And then I found this ad for Tamarisk Village that again had puzzled me, because this is a rear view of the house, which is actually quite beautiful. The street view looks nothing like it. And so again, this kind of helped join the dots, as I was saying earlier. This is the house that appeared on the cover of Mod Mirage. And the funny story about this one is that I met the now owners of that house back when they were in escrow. And I was at a talk at the Annenberg, where it was actually a showing of the William F. Cody film that Leo Zahn had done. And there was a Q&A afterwards. Adele Sigelman, who wrote Palm Springs Modern and the Arthur Elrod book, she was there, and I had met Adele literally for the first time the day before. And this kind of group of men came up to Adele and said, we're in the process of buying the Charney residence, and we gather it's by William F. Cody, and what can you tell us about it? And Adele was like, I'm sorry, I don't know. But I knew that I had this article in my files. So I kind of pushed past Adele, who was fortunately fairly understanding about it. And I said to these guys, I said, look, I know that I have information about the Charney residence in my file at home. When I get home, I will send it to you. So I got home, I looked it up, and it says Wexler and Harrison, not Cody, on this article. So I sent it to them. They were literally flying back to New York that night. And I sent it to them, and they were obviously thrilled. And then we started doing some more digging. And this is where I'm going to talk about archives. So archives can be anything, as you've seen, from Desert Sun archives to Los Angeles Times archives. But when it comes to architects and photographs and stuff like that, they tend to be stored usually with kind of universities, but there is access to a lot of the California archives through the OAC, which is the, oh gosh, what's the acronym stand for? Something like Archives of California. So the first thing to do in this case is to look up Charney. And I went into the Cody papers, and sure enough, Charney was on there. In fact, the city of Rancho Mirage had done a survey in 2002 that said that Charney had designed that Cody had designed the Charney residence. But it was looking like that wasn't quite true. As it turned out, Cody designed an extension quite early on, but he didn't design the original house. So then what we also knew from the article that I had from Palm Springs Life was that Ekbo, Royston and Williams, who are probably the best landscape architects in California at the time, had done the landscape design, and the owners of the Charney residence went online to UC Berkeley, where the Ekbo archives are held, and they found the drawings, the landscape drawings for their house. And this is what they looked like. And these were super important because they showed the new owners where a really sort of ugly addition had been created. There was a big kind of addition sitting out of the master bedroom, and the master plan and the landscape plan for this house were pretty incredible. So it also informed all the decisions they made in the future for the landscape design, for restoring it, and for changing the house back to the way it should have been. We also knew from the Palm Springs Life article that I had, the 1958 article, that the slides there were by a guy called George Zanuck. And George Zanuck was important because he did a lot of work for Architectural Digest and as well as Palm Springs Life. And fortunately for me, somebody I think it was Frank Lopez again, figured out that the Zanuck collection was actually at UCLA. And we were able to find all the original Zanuck photographs from that photo shoot. So this is what the house looked like back then. And it's the same picture that was used in that vintage Palm Springs Life article. And then here's some amazing photographs of the inside, the interiors by Arthur Elrod. And this is such a stunning house, and the owners of it did an amazing restoration job. They took it back to the studs, they got rid of the addition, and so it's won awards, as it should do, rightfully. I'm going to talk a little bit about the archives for the Leicester residence. Fortunately for me, A. Quincy Jones archive is also accessible through the Online Archive of California. That's what the O stands for. And so I looked up the Quincy Jones papers, the title here. I entered Leicester in the search box, and I get 5 hits that come up. And when I click on that, I get Margaret Lester. But curiously, it says next to it in parentheses, proposed. Fortunately for me, I knew I still know the head of the Special Collections Library at UCLA, where the A. Quincy Jones archive is. And I sent him an email, with a Google Earth image of the Leicester residence. And I said, okay, Simon, can you look in the files and tell me if the site plan for the Leicester residence bears any resemblance to this Google Earth image? So he had to go to some work because everything's kept in a warehouse pretty much. They don't just keep it sitting in files. They've got huge amounts of collections. So a couple of days went by and he got in touch with me and he said, yep, it looks like that's the house. So by then, obviously, I knew we had the press cuttings. So we were feeling pretty confident that it was A. Quincy Jones. And this image that he sent me back confirmed it as well. So what we then did was I took the owners of the house who had contacted me in the first place. We drove into Los Angeles and spent a couple of hours at the Special Collections Library looking through all the A. Quincy Jones drawings that the archivist had pulled for us. You have to make an appointment to go, you can't just turn up. But we were able to confirm, obviously, that what A. Quincy Jones had drawn in that elevation was very much what had been created, at least to the golf course facing elevation. So that was incredibly important to us. So last point on this is the original grant deeds. What quite often people say to me, so what happens if you can't find, you just can't find, and sometimes happens to me, you can't find the information you need in the phone books, can't find anything in the Desert Sun archives. Sometimes people just didn't do very much, so they didn't appear in the newspaper. All the rocks that you're looking under aren't revealing anything except for bugs. So what happens next? Okay, if all else fails, what you need to do is ask a friendly realtor to ask their favorite title company on your behalf for a set of grant deeds going back at least a couple of years before the house was built to the present day. And these will at least identify the original owner. And then if you get the full set, which you do need, especially if you're doing a historic designation, because you have to prove ownership from beginning to the present day, you will see through that process if anyone else famous comes up. Because if you were interested in getting your house designated, it doesn't have to be the original owner that has to be famous. It could be somebody who's second, third, fourth owner. If they're sufficiently famous or have done anything that makes them an important person, then that can get you a historic designation. So grant deeds, that's the final word on that. Just going to have a sip of water here. Excuse me. So this is an example here. This is where I found Pascal Rizzo. Again, people's nicknames. Pascal I know to be Pat. So I looked up Pat Rizzo in the Desert Sun and found loads and loads of stuff. And I thought, okay, then I found he was a musician. I found all these bands he'd played with. I found pictures of him with Sly Stone. I was like, oh my gosh, I found pictures of him with Frank Sinatra because he played with Frank Sinatra early on. So his name was all over all sorts of stuff. And then more recently, somebody asked me about a house on Palmview Road, on Tamarisk Lane, that was supposed to be a Sackley. And I said, well, get hold of the grant deeds and see if you can find anything on there. And sure enough, it turned out that Stan Sackley not only was the architect, but he actually built it as a spec build. So that confirmed that story as well. Okay, so I think I'm going to ask for questions first before I do some practice. So if anybody wants to ask me anything at this point, just unmute yourself.
Do you know if the LA Times archive, because I used to live in LA, but no longer, I don't have a library card. Is that available to LA Times subscribers?
That's a good question. I think you would have to, it probably is.
Okay.
I think it's worth asking or checking on LA Times to see. I know for the New York Times, I'm pretty sure subscribers can access their old archives. So I would imagine you probably can.
Thank you.
Hi. Thanks very much for the presentation. Really, really informative. I was actually sneaking some looks at some old phone books while we're talking. Question, you were talking about the building permits and that you had scans of them. I was trying to check on building permits for the history of my house, which is right next to the house that you just did, actually, the Miles residence in Thunderbird North. And Riverside County told me that they had lost all of their as-built. Are these just the permits, or are they as-built, plans, drawings, things like that you were able to find?
Just the permits, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so which is your house? The what I think of as the Pollard Simon's house on the
Laura Simon's house, that's right, yeah.
right. Yeah, I went through the Cody archives up in San Luis Obispo looking for that house, and I found all sorts of stuff that was misfiled. But I could not find the drawings to that house. And Kathy Cody told me that in the mid-50s, she wasn't sure the exact date, like around 56, 57, sometime like that, her father had been keeping all his drawings in a shed at the bottom of the garden, and the shed burnt down.
Oh, no, okay.
Yeah. So every once in a while, architects' archives are hit and miss for that very reason, because sometimes family members threw everything out or things got destroyed for whatever reason. Okay, any other questions?
So I have a quick question. When you work with an owner, you put together and present them a packet of what you've researched?
So when I'm working with an individual owner, I give them a proposal. I tell them what they can expect. I show them examples of what I've done. It depends. If they want to go through to a historic designation, obviously there's a fee involved, because it takes me between 3 months and 6 months to do each one. It's like writing a book. The Leicester one was about 160 pages by the time I finished it with all the documentation. Some of them don't take quite so much, because if they've been approved for designation here in the city of Rancho Mirage, it doesn't take as much work to get them through. But if they were never on the City of Rancho Mirage list, then they want full proof. So short answer to your questions, I put the whole package together if somebody commissions me to do that.
So is it possible for me to get one that you've already done? I used to own the Fine residence, and I sold it to the current owners.
Okay.
So I'd love, I was really surprised when I saw that it had gotten the designation. I
Yeah.
lived there like 10 years.
Yeah.
And had no idea that Pat Rizzo lived there at one time.
Yeah, it was a funny thing about that particular story, because that house obviously had some changes made to it, and the Historic Preservation Commission were really reluctant to, we'd found out who the architect was, and he was actually a pretty important LA architect. And so I was able to prove that this guy had a lot of importance and influence. But there had been changes to the house, so we couldn't get it designated on architectural merit. And so then we said, well, what about the kind of celebrity merit? And they seemed prepared to go along that route. And then for some reason at the last minute, there was something like 7 different criteria. You can meet just one of them to get designated. So we went with another criteria, which was that it was a good example of a tract home of the era, and they decided to give it a designation on that basis.
Can we
But
chat?
I'll be happy.
Sometime?
Yes, I'll send you a link to it. It's a long document, so if you're on Dropbox, I can send you a link. Just send me an email to melissa@preservationmirage.org.
Okay, and I can also, if you're interested or the new owners are interested, I can talk more about to them about some of the changes that were made. We actually put it back to some of the way it was.
Oh, okay, right. I'll put you in touch with them.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
All right. Any other questions?
Yes, it's Ardith. I just wanted to know, will this presentation be on YouTube?
Yes, we'll share it in a day or two, and we'll send you a link.
Great. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay. Right. Anyone else? If not, I'm gonna just take. Would it help you if I show you a bit of what I do from scratch? I think so. Okay. I'm just gonna escape this for a second. Okay. Hopefully. Oh, this is something actually before I get into practicing that I wanted to just mention to all of you here. I know not all of you have signed up to be members of Preservation Mirage, but at the end of this presentation, I'm going to show this up on screen as well. We have a QR code. We welcome you to become paid members. There's various different levels. And with that said, I'm going to shut this down, hopefully. And okay, I'm going to go on to my, okay, give me 1 second here. Okay, I'm going to do this and then share it with you. Okay, now let me just see. Bear with me 1 second.
Will you give us your contact information before this session is over, an email address or something?
Absolutely, yeah. Actually, Nathan, who's one of the board members with me, he can maybe put up in the chat box. Would that be okay, Nathan?
Not a problem.
Great. Why can't I get this to share? So this worked earlier. Here we go. Here we go. Yay. All right. Okay, can you all see what I'm looking at? Palm Springs telephone directory, accessing the past. Yeah, okay. So what I would do here, you'll see I'm in the accessing the past page, and it's taken me to telephone directories because that's what I asked it to do, 1938 to 1964. See, it only has 28 issues, so it does have a few years missing here and there. So I go into search. When in doubt, go to search. And what I then do is let's go to Leicester, because that's what we've been talking about. So I put Leicester in my quotation marks, and then I click on the magnifying glass. If I'm going too fast, tell me. Okay, so then I've hit this because one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, is that sometimes people's names aren't spelled out the way you think they should be. And I found that a lot with phone books, and I found it quite a lot with press cuttings in the press cutting archive, which I'll come to. So what I do now, I've come to the, this is a weirdness on accessing the past. Even though you think you're in telephone directory, all of a sudden here on the left-hand side, it's saying high school yearbooks. I don't need high school yearbook. So click on telephone directory again. And that way, you know, you're just getting the telephone directory. So I know that Margaret Lester was there in the 50s. So over in the left-hand column, we have decades that you can go through. So I click on the 1950s. And this just kind of reduces your search, obviously. So now I've got quite a lot of pages. I'm going to go for, let's say, 1954, because I'm pretty sure she might have been there by then. So what do I see here? I see page 95, Leicester, Margaret, but it's not spelled out. H. So if I had entered Margaret Lester, I wouldn't find what I was looking for. So that's why I go to Lester before I go to anything else. It does mean that you've got to kind of weed out the other Lesters, but at least I know that I've got the right one. And so I click on that, and this comes up, and I have to zoom in on it. It's kind of a pain. But if I zoom in, they've got a little tool over here on the right. Here she comes. So here's Margaret Lester on Cypress Drive. You know, one of the things I love about old phone books is that you kind of end up with other cool stuff, that you get sidetracked. You find Bing Crosby's home phone number and his home address. It was everyone was in the phone book back then. They didn't have any reason to hide. It was kind of cool. So here we have above Margaret Lester, Sol Lesser, who was a really famous movie producer. And then up above Mervyn LeRoy, who was actually a well-known actor who I guess became a producer, either that or they got the information wrong. So that's an example there. Does anybody want me to call up the name of somebody or the address of your house? Give me the address of your house. Okay. Now the thing about your house is that your house was on a street that had a different name back then. Do you know that?
You mean, what was it called?
It was called Nonesuch.
Nonesuch. Yeah, it was on Country Club and Nonesuch. Which is now Morning Springs.
Yes. So that's another kind of thing that you find out when you're researching. So if you look up Nonesuch, which I've done in the past, as you can see here.
Sounds like you've already got my house done. I guess I have to hire you.
Well, I have done a lot of not the previous owner who did all the work on that house, which was not that great, but we won't go into that. But the Malamutes who were there
The
for
Malamutes, yeah.
Yeah, they were interested in having the house designated, but they abandoned the idea for some reason. So Nonesuch isn't coming up, so that's not much help, but we might try because we
All
know
right, Simons, yeah.
Simons, yeah. So I'm going to try Simons.
So they showed up in the 59 phone book, but I couldn't find them any time after that. So,
Right, so here he is. He shows up in 1954 because he, in fact, had just bought that ranch. It was the Loop Ranch that he bought. So it's kind of interesting. I don't think I ever even knew that he showed up that early on. Okay, this will clear in a minute. So yeah, Thompson's Road is what is now Morningside.
Oh, okay.
So Thompson's Road, the reason that it's called Thompson's Road, as far as I know, is Thompson's seedless grapes were growing around there. And in fact, Ardith, who's on this call, her ancestors, not her ancestors even, I think it was her grandfather, Howard, was one of the people involved in creating Thompson's seedless grapes. I think I'm right in saying that. Ardith will correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure.
Howard was my husband.
Oh, he was your husband?
Yeah, but my father-in-law was the one that came down early in the
Thank you.
60s. Yeah.
Thank you. So, and it was your father, did your father-in-law invent Thompson's seedless grapes?
No, but they were responsible for a lot of the grape growing. And I think the Springs, wasn't that a grape vineyard
That would make sense.
in the 50s?
There were certainly, yes, there were.
Nice rolling hills for grape growing. Yep.
Well, fortunately not for wine grapes. They're all
No.
No.
All
Table grapes.
table.
Too hot.
Yeah, over by Eisenhower, that was all Frank Gogarty's place, and he had wine, grapes, and everything before Bob Hope bought it from him.
Yeah, there was a guy where the Springs is now. Most of that was the Kirsten Ranch, Kersten. There's a Kirsten Road there, and if you drive up Kirsten Road to the end, you'll still find a really old looking 30s building that I think is the original Kirsten Ranch. And it's like going back in time. I swear to God, this particular little corner at the top of that road will just blow your mind. It blows my mind anyway.
So Simons did not own the property that the Eisenhower Center is on now? I thought he donated that property.
He donated some of the land.
Okay.
Yeah, he didn't donate all of it. He donated some of the land, and Bob Hope donated some of it as well. Yeah. So yeah, that's all that came up for Pollard Simons right there. But this was 1954 when he was just buying the ranch, and so because he was in the process of buying it, I guess his name is still up there as owner, and he probably he was still getting his master plan done by Cody at that time.
A quick note, 59 doesn't look like it's searchable by text unless you download it. Because I found Simons in 1959 phone book on Country Club Drive.
Okay.
Sharon,
Okay.
but that was the last I saw of him.
Right. Okay. All right. Any other examples, or shall I go to the press cutting? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Kind of my address, because there was nothing in Riverside County when we went to church there. It's on Tunis Road, 71704 Tunis Road.
Okay, 71.
704.
I'm going to tell you why I'm putting that hyphen in there in a minute. Okay, more often than not, the phone books at that time always had a hyphen between the 71 and the rest of the number. So that's why I've added that in. Actually, I'm probably going to have to go all the way back. Clear all is the key here. If you don't clear all when you're doing these things, it'll just be looking under none such for Tunis Road. So that's why I've just cleared it. Okay, that didn't work. Oh, because I didn't put the rest of my quotation mark there. Okay, do that. Oh, okay. Let me try something else. I'm going to hit search again. What I have found in the past, that if I just enter Tunis, it's not a very sophisticated search engine in accessing the past, as you've probably already figured out. It's actually quite old. It needs a lot of refreshing. So what I do is what year is your house, do you know?
1955.
Okay. All right. So what I do is I look up Tunis and then I look for the number 71747, did you say?
71704.
71704. If I scroll past it, let me know.
Can't keep up.
There it is.
Oh, there we go. Wow.
History in the making. Okay, I'm going to zoom in. Okay, that's who owned your house.
Wow.
Flora Lipking from Otto Realty. So now, okay, so this is a good example right here. What I suggest we do now is go to press cuttings and we enter Flora Lipking and Otto Realty and see what we can find on them. Would that be interesting to you? Okay,
Sure.
let's
At least
do
me.
that. All right, so Flora Lipking, remember that name?
Try that same chicken satay wontons are quite good for me. Probably. If I don't eat that much, you get one, I usually eat two.
Stop sticking your nose, buddy.
Just mute yourself if you're not talking to me. Thank you. Flora Lipking, was that it?
No G, just KIN.
Okay. CDNC takes a while. Let's have a look. I had a feeling she had a G on the end, but let's try it and
G.
see. No. Okay, let's try Otto Realty. Okay, so we have quite a lot of Otto Realty here. So we know where they are. Sales manager appointed by Otto Realty. Maybe that's going to be Flora. You never know. Okay, so what I usually do here is zoom in. Here's my zoom tool. Okay, it's not talking about Flora there, but that gives you an idea that, that's how to do it. So, what I would do in that case, I can try it now, is just to enter her last name and see if something comes up, because that quite often maybe she was called Flossie or Flo, so let's see here. Okay, let me let you into another secret. Over here on the left where it says publication, I'm going to just blow this up a second. Look for the Desert Sun.
Okay.
I'm not seeing Flora, we're seeing Mrs. L. She might, sometimes there were people that just kind of came and went and they didn't feature. So it's worth digging around the phone book a bit more and seeing if there were other people, because quite often people were renting homes as well. And so you had a variety of different people who would show up.
Do you want to explain why you said you hyphenated the numbers 71-704?
It was because that's the way they appeared in the phone books back then. And they did up until I don't know when they stopped doing it. I think the number in the front kind of showed the sort of position in the tract, and then the three remaining numbers were, the kind of street numbers. So we've kind of got rid of that hyphen now, but where I live, I'm in 71. I must be at some kind of longitude or latitude or something that shows up in the Riverside directory. Because especially back then, when Rancho Mirage in particular was being built, it wasn't incorporated until 1973. So everything had to be created from scratch, and street numbers were being created from scratch. And quite often there weren't street numbers until later on in the 50s, because it took that long for houses to get built where they needed to give numbers to different homes. Does anybody have anything they want me to look up on in the press cuttings? Do you want me to look up Pollard Simons?
The dash in the address, that was our address.
Who's speaking?
Artist.
That
Yes,
was
that was part of our address, 71-793 Tangier or Tunis, or that was our address when anyone wrote to us.
Yeah, that was exactly. So that was just the way the addresses were written out back then.
Well, and you still see that a lot in the Valley.
Yeah, you do. Some people still have it. Definitely.
Yeah. Thunderbird Country Club uses the dash still.
Okay. Good to know. I'm going to call up Pollard Simon, since we've been talking about him, because he's somebody I know appears a lot.
Mostly as a finance committee chair, I think, for Eisenhower.
So yeah, I mean, he started showing up in the 50s, as you would imagine, and as you say, because he was involved in Eisenhower. What I do, here's another trick over here on the right, where I'm kind of moving my cursor. It says best match first. You can go to oldest first or newest first. I find that quite helpful. So I'm going to go to oldest first, so you can see what else he was doing. So here he's talking, it's talking about, thank you, that's not very helpful. Okay, thanks. Let's see, I mean, he gets mentioned a lot in society things as well, so. So even before he'd started building anything, this is talking about him flying out from Dallas. He was really good friends with the Eisenhowers. That was one of the keys to his being here. And so it says they flew out from their home in Texas by their private plane. That was something he was doing. He was a really famous developer in Dallas. Let's see if we can find anything else. Let's see if we can find some pictures of him, because that's kind of fun. So on the left here, did everybody see what I did, or did I go too fast? Do you want me to go back? Okay, so I was just in the year, and I'd gone to oldest first. So now I've gone to Desert Sun, and I'm looking for illustrations, which basically means photographs. So here we have pictures of hopefully Mr. and Mrs. Pollard Simons. Pictures are often hidden away somewhere at the top. And they might not even feature Pollard Simons. Yeah, it looks like they don't in this particular case. Okay, yeah, that's it's not always as obvious or as sophisticated as you'd like it to be. This is an article about Thunderbird North being built. This is one of the earliest articles that most people have found that talks about why it was being built. I have a lot of historic photographs of Thunderbird North that I've shared with previous owners. So there are different ways in this particular website gives you the opportunity to clip articles. So what I've just done is I've just right-clicked on this article. So I've got my cursor over the article and I've right-clicked, and I can go zoom to this article, I can clip this article, I can get text to the article. And if I'm a member, because I pay $25 a year or something pathetic like that, I can actually download a PDF of it. Let's just say clip it, and I'll just show you what happens. So what it does is it creates something that it takes away the rest of the information surrounding the page. It's just taken out everything. So here you can see the original swimming pool. I think it's changed since then.
Nope.
Oh, okay, I thought it got
Still there. Nobody uses it, but
no. I think the size of it changed, got filled in a bit. I think this is your house.
yeah, I think so too. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it says it's the newest desert community. It's not a development, but a settlement of 10 friends, all members of Thunderbird Country Club. Talks about the 8,000 square foot putting green, the 70 by 40 foot swimming pool, and so on and so forth. And also, it says this home is Monty Moncrief's actually.
Right, that's the Moncrief house, actually. Yeah, ours wasn't built yet, I think. His wasn't built until 58. I think this is 56.
Yeah. Yeah. So it says the property a year or so ago was a great ranch owned by Pollard Simon. So he had built that, he had bought the whole ranch. He then developed some of the acreage. I think he sold off the rest of it. But this kind of gives you a bit of the history. Okay, I think that's probably enough. Has everyone had enough? Okay. All right. Any other questions from anybody?
This is wonderful. Thank you, Melissa.
Fantastic. Great stuff.
Good. Well, it's all good fun. I really enjoy, I go down black holes with this stuff, as you can imagine. I mean, once you start looking at the Desert Sun archives, you could go crazy. The LA Times, I've been into the Dallas Morning News archives about Pollard Simons, found some cool stuff about him there. So yeah, definitely talk to me about what I have, because it's a big file. And it's lots of fun. But if if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them afterwards. And I think Nathan put my information up on the chat. Yeah, melissa@preservationmirage.org. And as we say, we'll be sending information out to you via email with a link to the recording as well. So thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Melissa.
Cheers.
I can tell you a rabbit hole I went down in Los Angeles trying to get Mills Act approval for a WPA property in Silver Lake. It had a marker with the engineer and the project number, and it was denied, and I appealed it. And they were impressed to come back with more information on WPA housing. I kind of hit a stone wall, and the city of West Hollywood sent me to their preservation specialists. They said, come talk to us. What they said was that marker was stolen from somewhere else. If you look at the date on the marker and when your house is built, the two don't jive. So it was a good effort, but to no avail.
Oh, too bad.
Yeah.
Oh, well, good. All right, good to see you all.